Hello everyone, welcome back to Duo Magique. In today's video, let's take a look at how to reduce the mental trauma of Covid-19. I read this article 2 days ago as the fourth day of my new 100-day The Economist challenge, so check the description box if you're interested in joining the challenge. Also, this article comes from the leaders section of August 29th edition of The Economist. The original link is also in the description box down below, so check that out if you're interested. Right, let's get started. In Ecuador, people are still searching for the bodies of relatives who died of Covid-19 4 months ago. Instead of saying die of, we could also say die from, quoting from BBC. In Italy, a boy begged a priest to forgive the sin of lowering his face mask outdoors. Not since the Second World War have so many people in so many places been traumatized at once. So traumatized right here means you are subject to lasting shock because of disturbing things which have happened to you. Even after the disease itself is brought under control, the mental scars will linger. Bring something under control means to curb something, or to keep a bridle, B-R-I-D-L-E, bridle on something. Linger means stay or remain, just like the scar on Harry Potter's forehead. For many, the pandemic is merely an annoyance, which means it's just something annoying. It doesn't do much harm to your life. But some groups face a particular risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Many of us will experience some kind of trauma during our lifetime. Sometimes we escape with no long-term effects, but for millions of us, those experiences linger, causing symptoms like flashbacks, nightmares, and negative thoughts that interfere with everyday life. This phenomenon, called post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, isn't a personal failing. Rather, it's a treatable malfunction of certain biological mechanisms that allow us to cope with dangerous experiences.
The symptoms of which include nightmares, flashbacks, and feelings of guilt, anxiety, or isolation. If you have ever watched Sherlock, the one produced by BBC, you might know that Dr. John Watson has been suffering from PTSD. The most vulnerable are those who have been very ill or lost relatives, as well as victims of previous traumas, such as refugees, and those with frontline jobs. Frontline job is just another word of saying doctors, nurses, or healthcare workers. In Spain, nearly a sixth of those infected are healthcare workers, and most of them show signs of PTSD. In Bangladesh, where the incomes of poor people briefly fell by 80% when lockdowns were tight, 86 of the people in one poll reported COVID-19 related stress. You could also replace reported blah 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 related stress with show signs of, just as mentioned right here. Humans are resilient. The word resilient is frequently used in UN documents. For example, we say build up resilience, which means that people would be able to bounce back from a crisis. Those who experience trauma mostly cope. Cope means you could handle it. For example, you could say, I'll manage, I'll cope. When their homes are destroyed by earthquakes, they rebuild them and carry on, get on with it. Even the mass bombing of cities in the Second World War did not break civilian morale. Nonetheless, the world should take the collective mental damage of COVID-19 seriously. Take something seriously means you treat it as if it's a serious issue or a proper issue. Steps to reduce it cost little and can benefit not only individuals but also society more broadly. Basically, this sentence means it's cheap but effective. Research into previous disasters suggests that survivors' long-term mental health depends more on perceived support than received support. In other words, donations of money or food matter less than the feeling that you can turn to your neighbors for help. Such help is typically offered spontaneously, out of one's own will, but governments can also chip in. Just like in Kazo Ishiku's The Remains of the Day, the owner of the house offered to foot the bill for the butler's trip. This word could also be used as in cutting someone's conversation, to cut someone off. France, for example, set up medical and psychological emergency units after terrorist attacks and other disasters. These try to minimize the long-term mental health consequences of such events by offering immediate walk-in psychological support near the site of the disaster. So walk-in center, which means you don't have to have a rendezvous, which means an appointment with the doctor. Walk-in is quite similar to the UK's NHS system. In the UK, you usually need to have an appointment with GP if you want to get checked out. But then if you're having a relatively urgent need, you could just go into a walk-in centre. Several cities in France have reactivated this two-tent model. So right here you see the word two-tent model. The first tent is the hospitals where patients could go to get treatment, and the second tent is for mental care. Some people draw comfort from the fact that they're not alone. Millions are facing the same tribulations at the same time, but the pandemic also presents unusual challenges. No one knows when it will end. Social distancing makes it harder to reconnect with others, a step in recovering from trauma. Actually, if you have friends who are suffering from PTSD, one of the most important things you could do is to connect with them and tell them it's okay, you understand how they're feeling and how they're reacting. And the economic shock of COVID-19 has undermined, which means has diminished or weakened something, mental health services everywhere, but especially in poor countries. The most important measures will be local. A priority should be bringing people together by, say, expanding internet access. Mutual aid, which means it's like the AAA association in America. People help each other. Networks, for example, WhatsApp groups to deliver groceries to the elderly, which tend to peter out, which means to disappear, once the initial disaster subsides, which means it's becoming less strong, less severe, should instead be formalized and focused on the most vulnerable, as we just mentioned, frontline workers, people who have PTSD, etc. Mental health professionals should connect patients to such services and train more layfolk as counselors. Layfolk means it's ordinary people. In Zimbabwe, well before the pandemic, hundreds of grandmothers were taught how to provide talk therapy on village benches to depressed neighbors who could not afford to visit a distant clinic. Such innovations can work elsewhere too. You could also say Zimbabwe is having innovations in mental care and the rest of the world is taking note. Religious services and sporting events can provide a physical or virtual space for mourning. The story of the pandemic can be taught in schools, helping those for whom it was a hassle emphasized with those for whom it was life-changing. The mental trauma of COVID-19 cannot be erased, but it can be eased. Right here, hassle, you could say, oh, it saves me a lot of hustle, which means it saves me some hustle, which means it saves you some inconvenience. Empathize with, which means you connect with other people, you try to understand how others are feeling. So I think this article in general is quite simple and is friendly for all the English level learners. Right, so that's for today's video. You have some homework for today. You might notice that I have marked some sentences in grey. That means these sentences or parts of sentences would be useful when you're trying to make a summary. You can write down your summary in the comment section down below and I'm going to take a look at your answers. So that's it, and I'll see you in the next video.